I really like conspiracy theories. This was a line that came out of my mouth on a first date with someone I had just met, and it's safe to say that I definitely freaked him out because there was a very awkward goodbye after the end of the date, like, huh? And it got me thinking about like how we're actually meant to come across authentically, lead with our values in dating without coming across crazy or overbearing, or without also just interviewing the person, trying to, you know, make sure that they are tick, tick, tick aligned with the way you see the world, your worldview, your view on religion or politics or anything like that. And this resonates with me so much because when I was younger, I dated from a place that was led on attraction and chemistry. It was not about shared values, and that would often come up in a very heart-aching way at some point when, I don't know, a family member was going through a really tough situation or something was happening, and then all of a sudden you'd realize, wow, we have completely different approaches to this problem and we have different solutions and we're just not aligned. And you know, that's really difficult because of course you get attached to someone. So I think now it's made me really hyper vigilant when I'm dating, that I'm like, I want to always build my foundation around shared values. But how can we do this? How can we actually lead with that without just being super intense and without just feeling like you're interviewing the person? Because the fact that you're watching this video means that you're looking for a relationship with meaning. And that means that it's not enough to just be, you know, fond of someone or attracted to someone. You need to have that shared vision of life so that hopefully you can build a future together. But it is a struggle. How are we meant to do this without scaring someone off? And I definitely scared off this guy with my life philosophy. I was just like, these are my thoughts on like politics, these are my thoughts on healthcare, these are my thoughts on the schooling system and how it's trying to keep everyone poor and blah, blah, blah. I really was just going for it. And it was like I had an out of body experience where I thought, why am I speaking so much? And I'm just being so intense. It's like I was throwing every single one of my strong or controversial opinions into like a 10-minute conversation. And it definitely wasn't coming across natural. It was coming across forced. It was as if I was trying to be like, hey, I'm gonna throw everything at you and I wanna see how you respond and how you react, and that's the test. And obviously as a Catholic, you know, as a Christian, faith is the center and the foundation of my life. So that is something that I really do obviously want to get across, and that's so important for me. But I know that, you know, those kinds of fundamental values are really best shown through action rather than just through words, because anyone can say that, right? Anyone can say anything, but you need to show it, you need to live it. So it's one thing for me to say that, you know, I really value the virtues of humility or temperance, but then I'm like hogging the conversation and really almost coming across judgmental or anything like that. So it's just a really humbling experience to know how to actually deliver that message in like a clear way, not backing down, not being like, you know, lukewarm about your views or anything, but revealing it at the right time, revealing it with the right sense of openness and receptivity, like it's a discussion. It's not just like you telling someone, you talking to someone or at them about your values. So I think the first, you know, rule of thumb is, are you living out your values? Like, is it really apparent that those are your values? So random example, but like I've really been thinking about how I do think the schooling system in the UK anyway does fail us in equipping us to really be able to go out and create, be entrepreneurial, make money, learn things like how to invest or about tax. So I'm trying to teach myself now about financial literacy, and I'm doing that on my own time in my own kind of research. And that's fine, because that shows you that like you can see the value there. The value system is that I'm a little suspicious of the schooling system, and I don't necessarily think it's the full thing that we really deserve to be able to be equipped to be, you know, good adults and good human beings. So the way I'm actioning that is I am doing my research on the side, and I can talk about that as an interest, as a hobby, but I can't just use it to tout off about how I think the education system is so flawed and blah, 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 and just complain. Like, you have to do it from a point of positivity and always moving forward. And being able to identify a problem is fine, but you don't want to be so scrupulous about it and just fixate on the problem without talking about the solution. So that's definitely a tip I would say, because you don't want to end up on a rant because that's really unattractive, especially on a first early date. And another good tip that I read, which is about leading with curiosity rather than judgment. So while it could be really tempting to grill someone, like, so what's your 5-year plan? Or like, tell me about your faith life, or blah, blah, blah. It's so much better to ask open-ended questions. So some really good examples are, what's been shaping you lately? Or what's something that you've been learning about yourself recently? These are questions that on the surface feel quite light, but there's so much potential to go deep with them. And eventually you'll be able to know if someone doesn't match your values by, what they are responding to those kinds of open-ended questions. Some other examples like, what's been on your heart recently? Or what's a prayer that you just keep praying to God? It can be anything really, and it can touch on that spiritual, emotional, financial, physical, whatever kind of element that you're trying to dig in a little bit more and get to know that person. But it allows them to tell you without you putting them in a box like, well, do you do X or Y? You're allowing them to really be creative in their response and to actually tell you, because it's important that we actually listen on a date. I think if you're like me and you're very chatty, it can be really easy to just chat, but you're actually not getting a two-way conversation, and you're not being able to discern the other person or really receive them, because the other person is a gift and you want to be able to receive them wholly, in their totality, in their entirety, and you want to be able to actually give them a chance to show you that. And finally, I just think it's important to say that dating is a discernment process. And we need to remove this feeling that we're trying to convince someone or we're trying to convince ourselves. I think sometimes I can approach conversation as if I'm trying to convince them of a certain approach or a certain opinion. And that's just not the right way of being, because really it's like you can be completely honest and say, these are my thoughts and my opinions, but you don't need to do it in a way that feels very much like, if you don't agree with 100% of this, then I am out of here. And that's not really an accurate way to see if someone's going to fit into your life, because you're not going to meet a carbon copy of yourself who's going to have all the same ideas and opinions, because my gosh, that would be boring. So there has to be a receptivity and openness of, okay, let me just see if the fundamental values are aligned, and everything else we can see if it could actually fit together and if it could work. Because when you are with someone, when you meet someone new, there's going to be this alignment that has to happen, and hopefully that will happen very naturally, and there will be flow to it. It will just feel very organic. And I think as Christians, we're so lucky because we're so blessed to be able to have Christ at the center. Because if Christ is at the center and he's really driving everything, that's already one humongous obstacle and hurdle that you've already overcome, knowing that that person is as well in the race with God at the heart and center. That's already a huge thing discerned. So I think there's a really good balance between coming across overbearing, intense, crazy, too strong, but also really living out those values and not being ashamed to show them or talk about them. Because I also think, what's the point of coming off inauthentic while also knowing if the person doesn't straight away agree, it doesn't mean it's a complete non-starter. It depends how they are. Are they approaching you with an open and curious mind, or is it just complete judgment and shut down? Are you saying something about a theological belief or a political belief and they're just not receiving it at all? Or are they asking you questions about it? Are they clearly curious how you came to that conclusion and they're open to learning? Because at the end of the day, we are lifelong learners and we don't know anything fully. And that really requires us to swallow our pride and to admit that we don't know everything. And it can be really easy when we feel we have a debate or an argument down to just be like, you're wrong. But that is just the wrong approach. And also it's not a good approach at evangelizing anyway. If you have something you're so passionate about and you're like, this is the truth, and I wish and I hope that everyone I know and care about and everyone in the world knows this truth. It's a really good skill if you can actually talk about that in a way that piques people's interest and doesn't just get their heckles up and make them feel like they're being, cornered. So I do think this is a good skill to have interpersonally anyway, even in a professional context or in your familial context, to be able to speak about things from a place of, genuineness, but not a place of judgment or a place of pressuring that person. And also, again, when you date, you don't have to date from a place of marital logic. When you're married, it has to work, right? You have to make it work. When you're not married, when you're dating, you don't have to. You can walk away. You're free at any time. So at that point, this is the place to discern, to put your values and your cards on the table, not to hide things because you don't want to, try and brush something under the carpet to try to impress the person in the moment, but then know that it's going to come up at some point. That's also not good. So it's definitely not about like not mentioning anything on the first date, because what is the point if something is really, really important to you and it's a complete disconnect with the other person of necessarily pursuing it? But don't do that in like an interrogation kind of way. It shouldn't feel like an interview. Or maybe also don't necessarily drop any like controversial lines the first date, but you can feel them out. So this is just from my personal experience, because that date was hella awkward when it was just very clear that we were just on opposite spectrums of like our kind of worldview and our opinions about politics and policy, and just stuff that maybe didn't necessarily have to come up in the first date, but did, and was a good sign that we probably weren't a match. However, I don't think the way that we did it was the right way. I think there could have been a lot more openness. And it's about not thinking that you're in an argument or in a debate club. Like, you should feel like it's an open-ended conversation. But yeah, so that's my tip for bringing your values. Like, you know, live them, show them, demonstrate your values. Don't just talk about them, and definitely don't talk at a person about them. Allow there to be openness, to be, you know, times for questions, and times, you know, even if they say something that you're kind of like, I don't really agree with that. My initial response would just kind of be like disconnect and plan my exit. However, I would really like to employ different strategies, such as, oh, how did you come to that conclusion? Or I would love to know your thought process through that. And that way we're just going to be better conversationalists and better at being able to not just preach to the choir, to actually be able to have friends and have relationships with people who have different opinions to us. Now, I'm not saying we should marry someone with a complete different approach, but I do think this is a good skill, and especially when we're in the dating stage and we're getting to know people. But also, in defense of actually being able to be upfront about your values, I think it's really attractive because it shows that you're independent. You know, a codependent person, they don't have this self-acceptance, and they just want to be accepted by the other person. So they're much more likely to just roll over and agree, or not share their actual views or their ideas. And that is just like a really one-dimensional way of sharing yourself or of experiencing another person. So there definitely needs to be a balance, because I think for me in my past, like sometimes I just would avoid conversations. I would avoid conversations about hard topics because I was scared that we didn't agree. And that came from a place of scarcity. It came from a place of deep insecurity on my part, of being so scared of like either being alone or losing that person. And I was putting that fear above the value of what I knew to be true and what I knew to be right. Anyway, I hope that's been helpful. Please let me know if you've had any awkward situations like this, either being on the receiving end or realizing that you've just come across way too intense. And as always, God bless, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.